We're looking today at the question, the story of Noah's curse of Canaan. It was Noah's drunkenness sin. What did Ham do? Who did Noah curse? Why did Noah do the cursing that he did? Well, let's start with the exegesis on why did Noah get drunk. Two possible translations of Genesis 9, verse 20. That says in the NASB, then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. Either Noah began to be a man of the ground. That translation is possible. The implication would be that it was his first time to plant grapes. Or Noah, a man of the ground, began and planted. And the implication here is he began again to plant grapes. Okay, the normal Hebrew syntax favors the second option, not the first. For the word began may, as in Ezra 3:8, which says, now in the second year of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem in the second month, Zerubbabel and the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak and the rest of their brothers began and appointed the Levites from 20 years and older. Now, the Levites had been appointed back in Mount area of Sinai, right? But they began again to do this. Or it may not. Genesis 44:12. He searched, that is, Joseph's butler, searched the brothers, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. So he had not searched them before. This was the first time he began to search. So the verb can indicate the first time ever. So it may or may not. So the word begin itself is not determinative as to whether Noah had ever planted vineyards before. Why did he get drunk? Well, there are some reasons that we can eliminate. The first reason we can eliminate is reaction to the stress of the flood and cramped living in the ark. Number one, it takes too long for grapevines to grow and produce grapes and the grape juice to ferment to permit this explanation. Okay? Inexperienced with wine. Well, wine production is an art, not the unavoidable result of storing grape juice. However, there's a caveat that we ought to note here. We can't be sure that the pre-flood world supported fermentation, because we just really don't have any idea how the world was different after the flood than it was before the flood. So that at least slows down our the certainty of our conclusion. Question. Ladies first.
I can't remember the exact reference, but I think it's Matthew 28. There's a verse that says that the people before the flood were drinking. I think it does say drunk with wine.
No, it doesn't. It does say drinking. As it was in the days of Noah when they was eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, so shall it be when the Son of Man comes. And the word for drink is not a unique intoxication term. Question?
I heard you say that in the last class as well, that wine production is not, if you were just mulching grapes just to get grape juice, and elimination of the pulp is not, if you are actually just mulching grape juice with the pulp, you are actually incorporating the yeast, which is
right
on the back of the pulp, which
right
attracts the yeast in the air. So even if you leave mulched grape juice out in a cold,
it will ferment. That's true.
Will ferment.
It will ferment. However, it also it can also end up going to vinegar. So how do you keep it from going to vinegar as opposed to going to wine?
Cold, and this will probably be, as you said earlier, that it's 2 or 3 years. I'm agreeing with you.
Sure, right.
But you said it took 2 or 3 years, so this is probably the first harvest.
That's true.
And
I think
you're
that's true.
harvesting that in the cold season. But that's the conclusion I came in my paper.
So, well, I think I don't disagree with anything you said. So all of the research that I've done on wine making indicates that just simple grape juice from crushed grapes will ferment because of the yeast included from the grape skin itself. But there's a difference between wine as an art and just having fermented grape juice. And so it's one of those things where I want to say, okay, just be aware that it's not like if you just take grape juice, stick it in a sack, you'll have wine in 3 weeks, and off we go. It's not quite that easy. So the bottom line is we don't know why he got drunk. Okay? Did he get drunk? Yes. Do we know why? No, we don't know why. Was it sin? Well, the simple answer is yes. Drunkenness, whether intentional or unintentional, is contrary to God's will and thus is sin. So my answer is coming from the perspective that I don't change my term when I'm talking about intentional or unintentional. Okay, it's all sin. There's different types. God handles different types differently, but sin. Was Noah's self-exposure sin? I don't think you were asked to answer this question, but it's worth asking. Self-exposure when drunk is common. In fact, Habakkuk says, "Woe to you who make your neighbors drink, who mix in your venom even to make them drunk, so as to look on their nakedness. You will be filled with disgrace rather than honor. Now you yourself drink and expose your own nakedness. The cup of the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will come upon your glory." So, this is common. Exposure of nakedness in public is certainly shameful, and I think we could argue sinful. Private nakedness in your own tent or within marriage is sanctioned by God, so the answer is no. For Noah to be uncovered in his tent is not a problem from a sin perspective. What did Ham do to Noah? Now, here's where all the controversy lies. Okay, so I'm going to. I hope this isn't viewed as being unfair, but obviously I'm going to make use of the tools that I have at my disposal, some of which may not be at your disposal. One of the things that I can do is I can find all the places where the phrase in Hebrew, the phrase or the words "to see nakedness" occur. And so when you look this up, you see that the phrase "to see nakedness" may refer to spying on the undefended parts of a land, so it can be used metaphorically. It can be used with reference to incestuous intercourse, one time in Leviticus 27. The standard idiom for incest, however, is to uncover nakedness as opposed to see nakedness. So there is one place where it's used in that. And the phrase "to see nakedness" can be used in a non-sexual, non-metaphorical sense of to see parts of the body called nakedness. We see this in Isaiah 47:3, Ezekiel 16:37, and Lamentation 1:8. So, specifically, these are cases where Israel is being carried off, like in Isaiah, they're being carried off into captivity, and their skirts will be lifted up above their heads, and their nakedness will be seen. Okay? In fact, that's a fairly common phrase that God uses in describing the kind of shame that will come upon the Israelites through their exile. Ezekiel 16 is verse 37. Yes, please.
Therefore, behold, I gather all your lovers with whom you took pleasure, even all those whom you loved, all those whom you hated, so I will gather them against you from every direction and expose your nakedness to them, that they may see all your nakedness.
Right. That's a That's a verse that's actually double-edged. It's probably both bullet 1 and bullet 3. Because the nakedness of Israel as a nation is their humiliation and shame nationally, but then there's also the actual way in which that humiliation takes place is physically being stripped and being marched naked away into captivity. So these are ways that to see nakedness may refer. Now, first point that I make about this data is that both seeing and uncovering nakedness always refers to heterosexual intercourse, never homosexual. That is, there's no example where the phrase to see nakedness or to uncover nakedness is used in reference to homosexual behavior. So in Leviticus 18:22, which forbids homosexuality, the text says, "You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It's an abomination." Or Leviticus 20:13, "If there is a man who lies with a male as those who lie with a woman, both of them have committed a detestable act. They shall surely be put to death." Okay? The phrase to cover nakedness, as Shem and Japheth did, never refers to abstinence from sexual relations. Okay? So, the significance of that is that we have one person who sees it, two other people who cover it. We're trying to figure out what is the it that's being seen, what is it that's being covered, and what do these actions mean. Ezekiel 16:8, "I passed by you, says God, saw you, and behold, you are at the time for love. So I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness." And then he goes on to describe the clothes that he gave her. Hosea 2:9, "I will take back my grain at harvest time and my new wine in its season. I will take away my wool and my flax given to cover her nakedness." Now, Shem and Ham did not see their father's nakedness, according to Genesis 9:23. For this reason, they entered backwards into the tent. Okay, which suggests then that the seeing that they did not do is a literal seeing. The nature of their non-seeing argues, not conclusively, but at least is a support for Ham's seeing being understood literally, not euphemistically. So, here's the bottom line. What we know for sure. What we know for sure is that Ham saw Noah's nakedness. That Ham told his brothers, Shem and Japheth, and that from Noah's perspective, Ham did something to it. Okay? Here's my opinion. My opinion is that what Ham did was dishonor his father seriously by failing to treat him respectfully. Okay? That's my opinion. Now, you don't have to take my opinion. Okay? If your opinion doesn't match my opinion on your paper, that doesn't affect the grade. How you argue for your opinion may affect your grade, but whether you have the same opinion doesn't matter. You wanted to say something about this slide?
Yeah. When you use Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13, and you said it's never been, I don't see the word seeing nakedness, or if you're just going textually here.
No, that was my point, that you can't see the word. The word isn't there. So, in these two chapters, 18 and 20, the phrase "see nakedness" or "uncover nakedness" is used repeatedly to describe sexual relations that are forbidden. These are actually the only two Old Testament texts that prohibit homosexual behavior. Okay, there are other texts that describe it, like Genesis 19, but they don't talk about prohibiting it, or they imply it. Even Genesis 19, its implication. Right. And the men are asking the strangers to come out. And the men are asking the strangers to come out that we may know them. A euphemism for sexual relations. Yeah. Okay, so I I tend to be a minimalist in terms of my inferences from biblical data. That is, I try to make sure that I'm saying everything that has to be said and not saying things that don't have to be said. That's my interpretive approach. Other people tend to be more, whatever term you want to use, they like to go farther. Exegetical data. Who did Noah curse? Well, the text explicitly says that Noah cursed Canaan. Okay, so hopefully we all got that right. Noah didn't curse Ham. Noah made Canaan a servant of servants. And this is a Hebrew idiom. When you are an X of X, God of gods, King of kings, Lord of lords, servant of servants, you are the quintessential or ultimate of whatever X is. So the lowest kind of servant, Canaan, has been made here. Okay? Noah made Canaan a lowly servant, notice this, to his brothers. Shem and Japheth were not Canaan's brothers. Put, Mitzrayim were two of Canaan's other brothers. Okay? Cush was the other one I couldn't remember. Thus Canaan's brothers were not cursed, which means the rest of Ham's descendants were not cursed. Okay? Only Canaan's descendants were cursed. The tense of Shem, where Canaan is said to serve, suggests that Shem's descendants are in view and not simply Shem. That is, not just that Canaan himself is going to serve the person Shem, but the Canaan's descendants are going to serve the descendants who live in the tents of Shem. Okay? So what color were they? Well, this is something that I've never seen in the literature anywhere, and the reason I happen to know it is because I was in Egypt at Queen Hatshepsut's tomb physically to see this myself. Okay? That is, that on the walls of Queen Hatshepsut's tomb, there were colored, they weren't reliefs, they were actually inset, carved into the wall, pictures of all of the different peoples that Queen Hatshepsut had subjugated during her reign. She reigned in the 1500s BC. Okay? And they're identified as to their nationality. We get Nubians right here. Okay? Let me just turn off the light for a little better. Oh! That is not good for a coat. I didn't hear any rip, though. Nubians, you can see how their hair is typically negroid, color black. Libyans were colored white, or a tannish, a chalkish color. Egyptians are consistently colored red, and Asiatics, people from Palestine and on, are brown and olive skin. Now, this drawing that I'm showing you is also found in the Book of Gates, which is a document that has been discovered in Egypt. I didn't see the Book of Gates. I saw the wall of Hatshepsut's tomb. Okay. What's interesting is that from this perspective, Canaanites are clearly Asiatics in terms of their geographical location. Nubians would be the Cushites of the Bible. Okay? We're not really sure, at least I don't remember hearing, where the Putites went. Okay? Now, this drawing, together with the data from Genesis 10, 17 to 19, about the descendants of Cush, Put, Mizraim, and Canaan, supports the conclusion that the Canaanites, as inhabitants of Palestine, were brown or olive-colored and not black. Okay? So the curse had nothing to do with black, high melanin content in the skin. Okay? Now, why did Noah curse? Let me just pause there. Any questions about that point? We'll flip the lights back on so we don't go to sleep. Okay? Yes?
Is there anywhere else in the literature to find out what we just heard about? Because I've been told that.
Well, you can look up the Book of Gates as, that's going to show up on Wikipedia.
Okay.
And you'll see this information. You have to know, you'll have to have a translation to read hieroglyphics. I don't read hieroglyphics, okay? So I had to have a translation for that information. Okay, good question. Now, why did Noah curse Canaan? Since Canaan, as far as we know, as far as the text says, didn't do anything to Noah. Well, here's my guess. Okay, and I just offer this as a guess. I think that this was prophetic inspiration. That God had Noah say something about Canaan that God intended to fulfill through the Israelites, and that's going to play into why this story is included in the text of Genesis at all. Now, there's a possible parallel in the fact that Canaan is Ham's youngest son, and Ham is Noah's youngest son. So if Noah is shamed in his youngest son, he will shame his youngest son in his youngest son. Maybe. So Ham is disgraced in the subjugation of his youngest to all other peoples. The Canaanites historically were subjected to Mesopotamia, Egypt, Israel, Assyria, and Babylonia throughout history. The Israelite conquest of Palestine destroyed many, but not all of the Canaanites. In Solomon's day, all non-Israelites present in Israel were subjugated and put to forced labor. Okay? There is no record of Palestinian Canaanites existing after the Babylonian conquest. So as far as we know, there are no ethnic descendants of Canaanites alive today. Okay. Now, what are the original audience implications of this text? Well, I hadn't ever noticed this until I was listening to the dramatized version of the Bible here last week. So, listened through this section. And what struck me as I was listening, as opposed to when I was reading, was that twice Ham is said to be the father of Canaan in places that nobody else is being said to be the father of anybody. When they come off the ark, it says Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah and his sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, the father of Canaan, came off the ark. And then, just as Ham's getting ready to go into the tent to see Noah, it says, and Ham, the father of Canaan, entered and saw Noah's nakedness. It's like, okay, why is this father of Canaan thing showing up? Well, since the descendants of Canaan had been destined through Noah's curse by God to be subjected to the descendants of Shem, Israelites are Shemites, they're descendants of Shem, and Genesis 10:15 to 18 identifies the descendants of Canaan as the contemporary inhabitants of Canaan, the Hittites, Hivites, Girgashites, Jebusites. All of these are Canaanites. What do we have? We have a history that provides a background to their subjugation under Israel, first of all. And then Genesis is going to go on to provide a historical reason for their annihilation. And we find that in Genesis 17, where God tells Abraham, your descendants are going to be in Egypt 400 years because the cup of the Amorites, which was another term for these Canaanites, is not yet full. But when they come out, and then we get over to Deuteronomy 7, and we get genocide commanded. They're all wiped out. Well, there's a good reason for these commands. We see that they were destined to be subjected, that they're giving grace, 400 years of grace for their iniquity cup to be full. Now their cup is full. God's going to pour out punishment, and you, Shemites, are going to be the instrument of God's divine judgment. So it provides both historical and theological justification for God's command to wipe out the Canaanites and eventually to subjugate those who weren't part of the seven nations, specifically haramized. Haram means you've put under the ban and you're eliminated. Yes?
So you think that Ham went and sent his father's nakedness because Canaan needed to be cursed? Or because, I mean, I understand.
No, I'm not reading it backwards that way.
Okay, because that's what
You
said it was predestined for the Canaanites to be punished.
It had been destined by God, I should write in there, through Noah's curse.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Did Ham have to see Noah's nakedness? Well, I don't know. Did he have to tell his brothers? That I do know. No, he did not have to tell his brothers. Okay. Yeah.
In my research somewhere, I read, somewhere I read that there was, even though Ham was the youngest son, he was always mentioned in the middle, and the redactors changed that because they were going to, Canaan was getting cursed, and he was the youngest son, and in Hebrew the son is the exact word for grandson. So therefore, they actually added the word saying Ham, the father of Canaan. Something like it was very interesting. It made a lot of sense, but I just didn't know what was the authenticity of that claim.
Okay. I'm very glad that you brought this up because this justifies all the time that I spent talking about Pentateuchal criticism. Okay. What you just enunciated was a classic statement of somebody who doesn't believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch or was responsible for its final form, and that stuff has been added, changed, adjusted by any number of people down through the ages, and there's not one piece of evidence to support that. It's a complete fabrication.
It was a good theory.
There's all kinds of great theories that don't have a bit of evidence to support them.
I just couldn't find any evidence.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Question.
Is it only a fabrication according to the Textual? Because I know that we've been doing some textual criticism in another thing I'm involved in, not even GPS, but they in the Lord's Prayer, they added at the end a certain phrase of amen, and that's added, and then they found older texts to recognize that they had added. So isn't that kind of proof that some people did add things? The different people who were copying.
Well, it's proof that New Testament scribes, when copying New Testament manuscripts,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
but there's nothing like that for Old Testament. Okay? None.
So how did people had to copy it?
They did, and they were the level of care that Old Testament scribes gave to copying the Old Testament is without parallel anywhere in any other document's history. The Masoretes counted every single letter in a book. They knew the exact middle letter. They knew the exact middle word. They knew the exact middle sentence. And the letters of both copies got counted. If they weren't identical, the copy got thrown away.
Okay, and then what about
Now, just before you say what the next, do you understand the implication of that for the continuity?
I'm asking a question on this.
Okay.
I understand that. So, kind of going back to a previous class, you said possibly in the genealogy they missed a name.
But that name is missing from all of the Hebrew manuscripts that we have. So it would have been missed way back there somewhere.
Right. Because the only thing it's missed because we see it in the New Testament.
No, because we see it in the Septuagint. Which was translated in the... Well, it is, but Luke would have gotten his information from... the Septuagint. Okay? Because that was the Bible Luke used. I don't think Luke was receiving a verbal message from God. First you write this guy's name, then the next guy. I think he was using sources available. So the Septuagint gives testimony that there was some Hebrew manuscript at some time that had the word Canaan. It was actually Canaan. Textual criticism is extremely complex, and the farther you go, the more complex it gets.
A very important question. Since I mentioned the redactor, do I get a special credit?
Yes. Put it down, right? There's this imaginary chalk one up for board. Okay. All right. What are the theological implications of this story? Well, first of all, the curse of Canaan, which appears to be a prophetic statement, did not preclude Canaanites from being saved. Rahab the harlot was a Canaanite. She got saved. Her family was saved. Canaanite. The blessing on Shem seems to have messianic overtones. That is, it's in the tense of Shem that Japheth dwells. However, the blessing on Shem guaranteed nothing at all for all Shemites. As always, only those who meet God's requirements are accepted into relationship with Him. And interestingly enough, according to Galatians 3:29, all who are Christ's are Abraham's seed. In other words, we're all Shemites. Okay? Not ethnically, but spiritually. We are participants of Abraham's blessing and covenant through Christ, and Abraham was a Shemite. Yes?
Oh,
I thought you were waving your hand. Okay. The ramifications of this text are just absolutely huge. And I find it very fascinating that puts all believers, all Gentile believers, as not only descendants of Abraham, but therefore descendants of Jacob, descendants of Judah, descendants of David, descendants of the specific kingly line from which Christ came, and thus our birth relationship to Christ grants us reign or kingship privileges, which make sense out of His promise to His people that they get to reign and rule with Him. How could somebody who has no relationship to the Davidic line through which kingship is promised, to the tribe of Judah from which the scepter comes, have any right to rule? Well, the answer is we are Christ's seed through spiritual birth. And by being Christ's seed, we participate in His whole lineage, which gives us the Abrahamic promises, and the Abrahamic promises include blessing to the whole world. Yes?
So if we're thinking about that, if we're reading the Old Testament and we're seeing that God is giving a specific blessing or maybe even instruction to the Israelites, are we supposed to say that we can take that for ourselves and do that?
Well, if God gives a blessing to, let's say, Phineas, who stabbed Zimri and Cosby in the act of fornication, and says that for Phineas and his descendants, they shall receive an eternal priesthood. Jesus isn't from the Phinehite Levite line. Jesus is not a Levite, so promises made to Levites don't apply to Jesus' line. It would have to be a promise made that applies to the tribe of Judah. If it applies to them, then it applies to us. Promise to the line of David, then it applies to us. Promise to... Okay, so we've got to be part of the line the promise is made to. We can't just say, well, the promise is made to all Israel. Therefore, it's mine. for another reason. And that other reason is that some promises were made to spiritual Israel, and other promises were made to the ethnic Israel. And that complicates things. And I don't have as finely tuned a matrix as I would like to have to discern when ethnic Israel and when spiritual Israel is in view. Some things are easy to spot, like promises of spiritual blessing obviously come only to people who are being saved by faith in that spiritual Israel. But what about land promises? Does that apply only to spiritual Israel? Does that apply to national Israel? There's a bunch of questions there that are hard to answer. I don't really have good answers for. All right, so that's my lecture on Noah's curse. If there are questions left over from your study for this paper, I'm willing to take them. Anything you ran into, you had a question about, you'd like to ask about? Yes.
I was just struggling with trying to find a purpose for this paper because to me it was information and it wasn't really like how I can apply it to my life now.
Okay. Well, what that means is that you let me add to your list of reasons for doing assignments. All assignments are not intended to be applicable to your life. This assignment gives you an opportunity to do research and requires you to do research at a level that I don't know any other class in our curriculum that requires it. I certainly don't require any paper that requires this kind of research elsewhere, and I've taken all of Dad's classes, and he doesn't either. So, it's valuable from an academic standpoint. I think it's valuable from a theological standpoint because it forces you to ask, why would a story like this show up in the Bible? There's bound to have been thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of stories that didn't get included in the Bible. What's the point of this one? Now, if you can answer that question properly, then you're going to learn something about God. And anything you learn about God has application to your personal life. Therefore, we're back at the application level. This paper should have application. I see potential application in a number of areas. Shem and Japheth's response to Noah's nakedness is interesting from a 21st century cultural perspective. That is, we think almost nothing about seeing unclothed males, and certainly not 600-year-old unclothed males. Okay? But within a family structure of old men, from our standpoint, Shem and Japheth are going to be over 100 at this point, they considered modesty a crucial component of honoring their father. Which makes me wonder, do we have intra-family modesty wrong in our day? Our culture tends to permit a far higher degree of immodesty within family than we do outside of family. But here's inside family. Interesting question, worthy of consideration. Secondly, the fact that God records and history sanctions this curse on Canaan suggests to me how seriously God takes dishonoring of one's father, whatever happened. Even if none of us have got right in terms of what actually Ham did or who did it, God takes this profoundly seriously, and that ought to impact how we interact with our own fathers. It's really easy for us to distance ourselves from viewing our our action as, I'm an adult. I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm a 100-year-old man. Do I still have to honor my dad? Yeah, you do. And God's serious about that. Then theologically, who knows how long this earth is going to last? Okay? Maybe thousands of more years. Okay? What you do has long-term, long-range implications for who knows how many possible people. We tend to be, in our culture, very disconnected from the idea of cultural and genetic continuity. I mean, who's thinking about their descendants 200 years from now? Not many people. I happen to be one of them. I'm praying for all of my descendants from now till the time Jesus comes back, that all of them would serve God. None of them would be lost. That all of them would have whole marriages. None of them would be fractured by divorce. Okay? But that's very uncommon in our culture. But hey, what you do is going to affect people after you. And therefore, fear God, avoid evil, so that those after you may not be cursed by what you did. Not in the technical sense of cursed, but in the sense of the sins of fathers being visited upon the children of the third and fourth generation. The consequences of your sin ramify in profound ways. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking about Noah being a parent and he pronounced blessing and curse upon his children. I was wondering how relevant is that today in terms of family?
That's a good question. No, this isn't the only example we see in Scripture, right? Isaac pronounces blessing and essentially curse on Esau. And I intend to have my father pronounced blessing on each of my boys as they were born. He had a Bible. Each boy got placed on the Bible, and he prayed on them in the delivery room immediately after birth. I intend to bless them, and I don't know how God will interact with the choice to bless. In other words, whether he will choose to grant it the kind of status that he granted Isaac's or Jacob's blessings, but why not? So there's a difference between saying it's a good idea and saying you have to. I'm not at all saying you have to, but I do think it's a good idea. Question? No? Yeah. Okay. Well, I will give your papers the consideration that is due the effort that went into them. And fortunately for you, I use or maybe unfortunately for you, I use a rubric, which means that I'm forced to grade down things that I wouldn't otherwise, and I'm forced to grade up things that I might grade down otherwise. It's kind of a balancing act. A rubric makes you look at all of the components of a paper. The way the rubric works is the GBS writing rubric, I think, is, if it's not 50% of the grade, it's maybe 40% of the grade, and the content rubric is the other percentage. And I put the two grades together, the writing component and the content component together, to get the final grade. You'll get both rubrics. You get my markings on them. With this many people, I probably won't do a whole lot of commenting on the papers themselves, because it easily takes me 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes per paper, and you multiply that by 14, and I'll be struggling to get your papers back.
What about